So first and foremost, got to give a big shout out to Open Fortune. Open Fortune took the fortune cookie, turned it into something that isn't just cute, but is a real marketing asset. They put ads on the back of fortune cookies while keeping the initial fortune on the front, reaching 47,000 restaurants, around 99% of zip codes. And I really appreciate Open Fortune for making today possible. I'm really excited about this one. All right, folks, today we're diving into the world of iconic brands and killer marketing strategies with someone who knows how to shake things up literally and figuratively. We've got Stephanie Jacoby in the house, the Global Brand Director and Senior Vice President of Smirnoff at Diageo. Now, if you've ever enjoyed a well-crafted cocktail, chances are Stephanie had a hand in making that moment possible for you. Stephanie isn't just steering the ship for Smirnoff, though. That's a big deal on its own. She's been the mastermind behind some of the most legendary spirits brands in the game. From her time as VP of Innovation at Diageo, where she drove multi-billion-dollar portfolios with names like Don Julio and Ciroc, to leading the charge on iconic campaigns for Johnnie Walker, this woman knows how to make a brand not just survive, but thrive. But here's the thing, Stephanie doesn't just play by the rules, she rewrites them. Whether it's flipping a declining brand into a double-digit growth powerhouse or turning cultural trends into marketing gold, Stephanie is all about pushing boundaries and getting results that make the world sit up and take notice. So, Stephanie, with as an epic career as yours, how did you make it all happen?
If I go all the way back, I've been at Diageo now for 17 years, which is wild and hard to believe. And I came to Diageo out of business school, actually. And it was in business school that I was introduced to this idea of something called brand marketing. And,
what were your first impressions of brand marketing?
Brand marketing, so I knew that I really was interested in what made people tick, why they made decisions. I was a psych major undergrad, and I didn't know what to do with that. Like, frankly, I got to the end of undergrad, and I was kind of one of those jack of all trades, master of none, and I had this psych major, and I was like, what am I going to do with this? Sure. It took me a little while to figure out. I went to a tech company, did some .com startup stuff, and what I really loved was I loved inspiring people, presenting people with ideas, understanding what are their business needs and how can we help meet them with a product. What I hated was technology. Sure. And so, my husband actually went to business school first. He had some classmates. One of them worked at Diageo. And when I learned about Diageo, I was like, wow, it'd be so amazing to work on a product that I could talk about at a dinner party, that Sure. I could talk to my grandparents about, my parents about. And was introduced to this idea of Diageo, this huge portfolio of brands, and this idea of brand marketing as something that brings together creative and analytics, because Sure. I think I've never been one or the other, but always a little bit of both. And I think the thing that's so much fun about brand marketing is bringing together the numbers that lead to the strategy, and then the strategy that unlocks the creative. And that, for me, has been the sweet spot and what I love doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about your psych major, right? We've had a lot of guests on. We just had the CMO of Coach. He was an engineering major, right? Marketers come from a variety of different backgrounds, right? What about the psychology major, do you still take into the work that you do today at Diageo?
Yeah, I think I love to just understand what drives consumers to make certain decisions. I love getting to the insights. I mean, we know that the best marketing comes from what are the consumer insights that drive it, that help you to unlock something that's really powerful and enduring. And I think that psychology major, it just goes all the way back. And I mean, maybe I'm just justifying it retroactively, Sure. but I think that there is a connection there.
Absolutely,
of why,
no, there definitely is psychology behind every single purchase. You've been at Diageo for 17 years, yeah. right? There's definitely something in the water or the liquor, if you want to say, that it's just a special place, yes. right? With people, changing jobs all the time, yeah. right? It had to have something. What about Diageo makes it so special?
Yeah, it's a combination of things. I mean, I think within the world of brand marketing, I remember when I was looking at the different options, I was like, wow, I could go market toilet paper or roach bait, or I could go sell iconic brands that people really love. And the thing about, I think, liquor brands that are special and Diageo's brands that are special is they're not just CPG brands, they're lifestyle brands. Mm-hmm. And I think that makes the job special, because you're not talking about functional benefits. You're not talking about the functional difference between one whiskey and another whiskey. You're talking about often emotional positioning that resonates with people, and people believing that their drink of choice, their brand of choice in this category says something about them, and that's a really rich space.
Was there a
marketer.
campaign that just like pops to your mind as accomplishing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Johnnie Walker does it best with Keep Walking.
Yeah.
The idea of personal progress and what progress means to people, and linking that to toasting the moments in life that matter with a glass of Johnnie Walker.
Yeah.
There's just so many directions you can take that in, and it's a human truth, and it's enduring.
Absolutely.
But you can make it timely and timeless. So I think that's an example that I really love. And then, it sounds maybe a little bit corny, but it's the people. Honestly,
Totally.
I do think there's something about this industry and Diageo in particular that attracts smart people, but who are also fun and social. Our jobs are inherently social.
Totally.
And I think that creates a bond and a relationship with colleagues that isn't just the day-to-day 9 to 5.
Sure.
Which is awesome, because if you're going to spend this much time with people, it's nice to really like them.
Absolutely, and I want to get into Smirnoff, but before I do that, right, I do actually want to talk about Johnnie Walker, because it was your first role, right, out of business school. Johnnie Walker, when I think of Johnnie Walker, or when I think of my grandpa, I just think of Johnnie Walker. We buried him with Johnnie Walker Black, that was him.
Special.
But you coming out of business school, not necessarily the average consumer for Johnnie Walker, right? So how do you go about educating yourself and marketing a product that maybe you are not the perfect
Target
ICP?
bullseye. Yeah, such a good question. So coming out of business school, I knew I wanted to work on Johnnie Walker because I loved the brand. I just thought it was an awesome brand, global brand. People like your grandfather just love it, and it means something to them. But if I'm really honest, I can remember when I first started Diageo trying to hold a glass of scotch up to my nose and take a drink and just having my eyes tear up.
There's no way you could be
you're not going to
lie and say
learn.
oh yeah, it tastes like.
You have to
really
learn
yummy.
how to drink scotch,
Oh,
right? And the thing that kind of cracked it open for me was Diageo. One of the awesome things about the brands is these are brands, we often talk about standing on the shoulders of giants. These are brands that have been around for hundreds of years, have founder stories. So in my third week at Diageo, I got to go to Scotland, sleep in a castle, go out and taste the water source that all our water source from and making Johnnie Walker, get to understand the process. And I think understanding that process and developing an appreciation for the flavors that go into Johnnie Walker, as well as learning, a black label and ginger ale is a delicious and easy drink and a great way to step your way into a category like Scotch. And from there, now I'm like a Scotch aficionado and I love it. But yeah, it's real. But then I think the other thing that's great about that is, to your point, I'm not the typical Scotch consumer.
Great.
And I think one thing that I'm really passionate about, as are many of my colleagues at Diageo, is inclusion. And there was such an awesome opportunity to open up the Scotch category to more consumers, make more people, particularly women, feel welcome. And not just women, but everybody. It can be kind of a category that you feel a bit put off by and don't know how to navigate
Just because you're also changing the narrative, right? For hundreds of years, older men have drank Scotch.
Completely,
right?
very exclusive, very
high end, whatever.
And so it was really fun to think about how do you invite consumers in and engage them in a brand that maybe traditionally hasn't been a brand that they would have seen for them. So that was a really fun part of the job.
Absolutely. And you end up becoming the VP of Innovation of Diageo, which is a hell of a title, as well as innovating on Smirnoff, right? I think this is a question for both those roles, but you're taking these brands that have been around for so long, right, that are just staple. How do you innovate on those while still keeping, the brand exactly what it is? The last thing you want to do is try something and
Completely, and it's a constant balancing act of how do you, what we call romancing the core. How do you romance the core brand, the original brand? So on Smirnoff, that's 21. How do we do things that always halo back to that? Because what you don't ever want to do is have a brand where you lose the core and then you just have a string of innovations, and that gets really messy to manage over time. But I think also with innovation, the cool thing about these brands is, obviously, we spend a lot of time figuring out what do consumers want, what are the trending flavors, what are they drinking that allows us to lean into something that we think is likely going to succeed. But the other nice thing about it is these brands, you're not going to break these brands, right? We're not going to break the brand with an innovation. If an innovation doesn't work, you get rid of it and you do
Totally.
something else. And so I think that like agility and that willingness to kind of take risk and experiment is so important, particularly to lead the way in
Totally.
innovation. So, I think just embracing that ethos, which I think Diageo really does.
So I would love to talk about just like your creative vision and like your proudest achievement with trying something new at Smirnoff that really worked.
So creative vision on Smirnoff. So when I came onto Smirnoff, the brand positioning was not the same around the world. So this great big brand, it's a $2 billion brand, the fourth largest spirits brand in the world, and it kind of like ended up very fragmented across. We're sold in 180 markets around the world. So I think I felt very strongly coming in. This brand is a global icon.
Sure.
It deserves to have a cohesiveness to it that allows it to stand out, be consistent. Whenever you're seeing it around the world, you know what Smirnoff is going to look like. So I think that was the biggest thing, was I just felt like this is a really big brand, but we need to aim for a cohesiveness that allows us to behave like the icon that we are.
Yeah.
Cohesiveness does not mean being monolithic. It doesn't mean that we're going to look exactly the same everywhere we operate, but it does mean setting a foundation and a framework that then allows markets to have freedom within that framework. So if one market wants to launch raspberry where another market wants to launch peach, or one market wants to go and sponsor the NFL while another market wants to sponsor a big music festival like Electric Picnic in Ireland, giving enough flexibility so that you can keep that cohesiveness while allowing the brand to be locally relevant at the same time.
And Smirnoff, right, I'm not too sure on their like exactly ICP, right? Because it's a lot larger, I believe, than Johnnie Walker, right? That
It's
like
massive.
right, it's anybody who drinks vodka, which is
We often,
18-year-olds to 75-year-olds. So how do you, because there's that quote, I'm not sure who said it, but if you market to everybody, you market to nobody. How do you still do
love
those
that.
things?
I definitely believe you market to everybody, you market to nobody. And it's a challenge, I will say, right? Because as you become this big legacy brand, there sometimes can be a lot of risk associated with like, oh, well, we have to make sure we're talking to everybody. We got to talk to our existing consumers. And I feel really strongly that there's a difference between your creative muse for a brand and your media target for a brand. And that your creative muse needs to be pretty sharp and pretty focused on who is the consumer and what are the values that you want, or I almost think of it as what are the eyes that you want to look at the world through, okay? So on Smirnoff, vodka and Smirnoff in particular is really important for new consumers coming into the category. So consumers that are turning 21 plus in this market, 18, a lot of markets around the world, often we are one of the first brands that they choose. And that's really important, right? That keeps us relevant, it keeps us modern. And so we have to retain that target and always be thinking about what is that consumer, how are they looking at the world, and what does that tell us about where we need to be in culture? What are the partnerships that we need to be doing? How do we need to be showing up? But also when we buy media, there's lots of people that love Smirnoff, and we love that they love Smirnoff, so we're going to make sure we are buying media and the right types of media that are going to resonate with consumers that are engaging with the brand in a different way.
And what have some of those forms of media been?
So, I mean, we do a lot of social, because the world is very social now, very digital. But like one of our mass media platforms is the NFL. NFL is one of the biggest reach platforms in the US, and that's an example of where we use a slightly more traditional approach with advertising that runs during big moments where we know that multi-generational consumers are going to be in front of the television. But we also do lots of things in social that are very targeted for specific audiences. So I think it's just kind of always balancing,
And how do you evaluate like just a brand awareness perspective from like an acquisition? Because I know Smirnoff does a ton of both.
Yeah, like an acquisition, like a product acquisition?
Yeah, or like anything from paid compared to brand awareness.
Okay, yeah. So I think we think about, we definitely subscribe to the Byron Sharp model of like you need to be recruiting all the time. So there is a role for always on awareness, because we do know that if we don't keep that at a certain level, you have to earn it back twice as hard. So I think there's just a smart kind of always on strategy. But then I think the biggest piece now is driving cultural conversation around the brand and figuring out how to infiltrate communities, partnering with creators, being in the right places to get the brand talked about, you know? And there's a difference between like, oh right, Smirnoff, and oh my gosh, did you see this cool thing that Smirnoff did, you know?
Yeah, and how do you measure talking about social, really?
So we do, social is a good way. That's one way that we do it. So we do a lot of social listening to understand how people are talking about the brand, what the sentiment is. But we also have enormous tracking studies that measure sentiment in terms of brand I'm proud to choose, brand I'd talk about with friends, brand that's more fascinating than others is one of the things that we track, in addition to reported consumption of the product. So we kind of look at both those things as kind of what we call meaningful and distinctive. That's kind of those measures of proud to be seen drinking, talkability, as well as am I reporting that I'm buying Smirnoff on a regular basis.
And what's something that you're most proud of just about Smirnoff, but also just your time at Diageo?
Yeah, I think on Smirnoff, but also my time at Diageo. I mean, I'm really inspired by brands having substance, you know, often that shows up as purpose. But on Smirnoff, the thing that the brand has been since the 1950s is a brand that really champions inclusivity. And we can show that in ads that feature, you know, Eartha Kitt, a black musician in the 1960s, champion of LGBTQ+ through many, many decades, and now is a brand that's championing inclusion in a lot of different ways, whether that's disability, whether that's ageism. And I think that, you know, I said earlier, one of the things I often say is, at Smirnoff we believe that the party's better when everyone's invited. And I think just that sense of everyone's welcome to the party, and by that we really mean everyone. And I think championing that as a core purpose and finding both big and small ways to live that, I think it's something that's really motivating for me and my team. And seeing how we can bring that to life in a meaningful way. So it kind of, obviously there's always the fun of working in this industry, but it's nice that it's got an additional layer of meaning.
And you've held a lot of positions at Diageo. It always takes a village to, you know, make something special happen. A lot of our listeners are, you know, in that 22 to 27 range, right? They're looking for that next step in their career. Maybe it's a brand like Smirnoff or some brand that they really relate to. What do you look for when building your team from these potential employers?
I look for people who with a sense of possibility. So I think you know, a boss told me early on in my career, it's easy to spot the problems. It's hard to create the possibilities, right? It's harder to actually get to yes than it is to no. And so I think just always that person who's pushing for, right, here's what I want to do. If this way doesn't work, let me see if there's a different way up, around, or over. And really creatively solving problems, I think, is a big one. And then I think ownership, you know, where you're really committed, you're really seeing things through to fruition. It's not just I'm checking something off a task list, but that I really am proud of this thing that I'm creating. I think, and then probably resourcefulness, you know, even in the biggest companies. I mean, Diageo is a huge company with so many resources, but still there is like a scrappiness that's always going to get you ahead in any company, regardless of how big it is.
Absolutely. I think it's so important to be scrappy and stay nimble, even if you have all the resources out the world. It's how you separate yourself. You know, one last question before we enter the quick question round. I want to, you know, our listeners have been tuned in. They've been listening to a lot of episodes, and I like asking this question at the end. Is just if they were to take one thing away from, you know, this podcast, what would it be?
You know, I think the experience that I've had in my career is that you can achieve a lot through relationships with people. You know, mobilizing big brands, and especially a global brand like I've done Johnnie Walker and Smirnoff. As you said, it takes a village. It doesn't happen overnight. And I think there's an African proverb that says, If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And so I think there's a big part of this job across, or both within a marketing organization, but across a larger organization where brand marketing often plays a leadership role, is bringing people along with you, inspiring them with a vision, and showing them how that vision can be achieved. And I think that's one of the sometimes the hardest things about the job,
Sure.
but the most rewarding thing about the job at the end of the day.
Absolutely, and I love that proverb. That's
Yeah.
a great place to wrap us up, and I really appreciate you spending the time.
Thank you.
So we're going to enter the quick question round, and
Okay,
then we'll get you out of here. Before we get started into our quick question round, just want to give a big shout out to Open Fortune for making today's possible. With such an innovative idea like putting ads in fortune cookies, they have worked with the likes of Duolingo, Chime, Goose Island, ZipRecruiter, and many more. So shout out to Open Fortune for making today possible. All right, person you'd most want to sit down to dinner with, dead or alive?
Michelle Obama.
Great one. We've heard that one before. Favorite city in the world?
Paris.
Is it okay to sleep with socks on?
No.
Favorite rom-com?
Friends.
Best spot to eat in Brooklyn?
Buttermilk Channel.
Favorite UVA grad?
My husband.
There you go. In 40 years, what would people be nostalgic for?
Smartphones.
That's a great one. Top 3 brands right now that you just feel are doing a great job?
Heinz and Heinz.
Heinz and Heinz. One thing people don't understand about working in the alcohol industry is
that actually we don't drink all the time. Yeah, we don't, and actually people have way more respect for alcohol working in alcohol.
I've got being so close to it, right? Yeah. What's the worst advice you've ever been given?
Wear a party frock, have 2 drinks, and go home.
Love that. In one sentence, how would you sum up the internet?
A black hole.
And then in 10 years, where can we catch you?
Hopefully running shit.
Running
somewhere.
shit. There we go.